Chair. I look forward very much to this discussion today. And in terms of my opening remarks, I guess I want to respectfully push back a little bit against the idea that it is somehow environmental regulations or environmental standards that are holding up the possibility of constructing lots of new dams. I'm not aware of a single dam, at least in California, maybe throughout the West, that actually has the financing in place to happen and is being held up because of environmental requirements. If somebody here today knows of such a project, I would love to know that. I am aware of a lot of new dam proposals that are being held up because of feasibility studies and the basic requirement that beneficiaries find a way that they can actually pay for these things before we start to build them. That's common sense, and that's sort of the law of reality and financing. That's not any particular environmental standard. The fact is, the most cost-effective dams in California and in other parts of this country were built a long time ago. The remaining dam sites that are under consideration are far more expensive and far less productive because the biggest dam in the world doesn't make it rain or snow anymore. You're talking about managing the same increment of water. There was a statement made at the outset that conservation does not add more water. I think if we had a few of the water managers from Southern California and other parts of California here today, they would tell you that's absolutely false. There are so many conservation strategies that we have pioneered in recent decades that do produce more water that we need to hear that perspective. We need to hear how evaporative losses and other losses have been dramatically reduced by pioneering conservation strategies, far cheaper, by the way, than the tremendous price tag of building new surface storage. We need to hear how transmission losses and efficiencies in the actual water infrastructure, as the ranking member likes to talk about, can dramatically increase the amount of available water, wet water, for beneficial uses throughout the system. It is sort of assumed and was assumed in the opening that cheaper water is better than more expensive, therefore we should be moving to surface storage before recycling and desalination. Well, there's a reason why new dams are generally not being constructed. There are some exceptions. Los Angeles and others have found a way to find the money, and they've been able to move forward with their surface storage. But there's a reason why you are seeing more recycling and desalination starting to happen. That's because people are willing to pay for them. These are not projects that are carrying with them huge federal subsidies like the kind of new surface storage projects that we like to talk about in these discussions. These are projects that San Diego and other places have decided are important enough to them that they're willing to actually pony up their own money and make them happen. The statement that the last major surface storage in California was New Melones in 1979 is not correct. That was the last Bureau of Reclamation, Central Valley Project surface storage, but as the ranking member pointed out, there have been huge new surface storage projects that have come online in California, but again, the secret to making them happen is that people didn't put their hand out and ask for huge federal subsidies. They actually found beneficiaries that were willing to pay for those projects, and guess what? The environmental laws didn't stop them. They actually happened. Los Vaqueros, Diamond Valley. There are lots of other local surface storage projects that they've been able to find a way to actually make happen. So it's really important, I think, as we move forward with this discussion to sort of tease out the religion of surface storage from the actual facts on the ground. It would be nice to hear from more water managers that have actually found ways to build these projects, because there's another story to be told here, and there's all sorts of water that we can be making available for all the beneficial uses that I know we all care about if we focus on creative strategies and the realities and the finances of water management instead of bringing out the old dogma about environmental laws and new dams being something that would happen in the absence of the Endangered Species Act. So I look forward to our discussion, and I'll try to bring it back to those realities whenever I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with Mr. Shivitani. I found your testimony interesting about all that outflow that escapes the dams and that at least conceptually could be captured at a high elevation storage point. But that outflow actually serves some purposes, doesn't it, when it escapes those dams?
It does serve a purpose, yes.
Well, not just a purpose, but let's talk about the many purposes that it serves. I mean, there are entire municipalities whose wastewater discharge programs would not exist if they didn't have dilution ratios based on that outflow. That's one thing that comes to mind. So
correct.
You may have some municipalities all over the state of California that might object to you shutting down their wastewater treatment operations. Those outflow flows that, some might take as wasted also help juvenile salmon out-migrate. They help migrating salmon spawn. They provide water quality benefits that are essential to maintaining beneficial use. There are riparian users downstream from those dams that have priority water rights.
Correct.
To use it for irrigation, for any number of other purposes. They provide all sorts of system work for riparian ecosystems. They mobilize gravels. They do things that an ecosystem can't even function without. Have you looked at how much of that water is actually doing something important versus how much could sort of conceptually, I'm sure it's fun to run these hydrological exercises, but that you could actually take away into the system through these higher elevation storage systems?
You raise a very good point, Congressman, and I think one thing that's unique about California, and you're well aware of this, we live in a Mediterranean climate where our precipitation occurs 4 months of the year.
Yeah, but my question is, have you analyzed how much of it is actually available for the conceptual high elevation storage that you're talking about today?
We've done some preliminary assessments just because we know.
Have you looked at water rights? Have you looked at downstream beneficial uses?
We have not looked at the actual water right tagging.
Then how can you know how much is actually available for this hydrologic exercise?
Well, we do it from a mass balance perspective first. So when we know that precipitation is coming in November through March, we look at that volume. We say, how much are the reservoirs evacuating?
What's the number? You said there was 18 million in outflow, 18 million acre feet in outflow. How much do you think you could actually capture in upstream?
Well, let's see. There's
without impacting other water users?
Depending on which watershed you're talking about. You're talking about the Sacramento, San Joaquin watershed going out the Golden Gate.
Okay.
Okay, there's 7 million acre feet that goes out
well,
per year.
Let's talk about that watershed because
okay, sure.
I was interested that in your testimony you didn't identify a single river or a single location for these facilities. You just testified generically that this theoretically is possible to do all this upstream high elevation storage. Mm-hmm. But on every major tributary of that system, you have existing high elevation storage, with the exception of wild and scenic rivers.
You have
which have their own legal impediment to what you're proposing.
Correct.
But have you looked at the other hydro projects, for example, in the San Joaquin, the Big Creek unit of Southern California Edison, the many dams that PG&E has mm-hmm. throughout the Sacramento system? Mm-hmm. If you're going to start putting dams in upstream of them, mm-hmm. you're impacting their water rights and you're impacting their hydropower operations. Have you gotten blessings from all of these different users? Because California is a state that's already allocated all its water.
It's allocated its water during certain times of the year.
Yeah.
So if you go to the state board and say, is that particular river over-allocated, they will say from April through September, yes. November through March, perhaps no.
Okay.
So when you talk about allocation,
I find it rather significant that you didn't identify any specific location where the theoretical high elevation storage would happen. If you have some specific sites, I'd love to have you propose them, and then we can, I don't have enough time to go into it, but I'd love to see it. I want to ask Mr. Barcelos a question, because, of course, it was very alarming for me to hear you say that even with a normal hydrology next year, that you're anticipating a 0% water allocation. I'm aware of a Westlands Water District, and they've got the worst allocation. Everyone knows that. Their last notice, October 17th, said that with even a below normal year, and with minimal to moderate delta restrictions, which was your assumption as well, they're forecasting 25 to 30% or up to 35 to 40% allocation. So I'm confused about your testimony saying that you're anticipating 0%, because that's very alarming. And then I want to also ask you to, hold on, I'm not finished with my question. I want to also ask you to speak to the other water users in the area, because of course the Friant water users right next door are going to get a significantly higher allocation. The exchange contractors also on that same system are going to get between 75 and 100% for free. So I just wanted to ask you to maybe speak to those, and how do you justify telling the committee 0% when Westlands itself is saying much more than that?
I was referring to what the anticipated allocation was going to be to Westlands. I am in the Friant units that I stated earlier. I'm on the east side of the valley. At this point, we don't know what our current allocation is going to be. On a normal year, if we can possibly anticipate 50%, I think we're going to be lucky. If the exchange contractors don't get the water because we have a short year, they can put a call on the water that Friant has available. We have technical experts that work that out. I worked strictly on, from a board perspective on my farming operation, but those numbers change, as you know, from month to month, depending on what precipitation is in those certain watersheds.
All right, well, thank you. I just want to suggest that we need to be very careful when we make representations like that in a congressional committee, and I want to congratulate you for your record-high ag production last year in 2012 for the state of California. That's impressive.
And the gentleman's time is expired.